The CEO paid her debt for a baby, but after taking her virginity, he fell in love and kept her. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She knew the phone call would come eventually, but she wasn't ready for it today. Camilla Brooks pressed her palm against the cool glass of the hospital window, watching the rain streak down in uneven lines. The oncology ward smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams, a scent that had become as familiar as her own perfume. Her mother's breathing was shallow, each rise and fall of her chest a small victory against the inevitable. The treatment isn't working anymore, Dr. Morrison had said 20 minutes ago, his voice gentle but final. We're looking at weeks, maybe a month. Weeks. Camilla's reflection stared back at her from the rain-soaked window. 25 years old, dark skin glowing despite the exhaustion etched around her eyes, shoulders squared against a world that seemed determined to break her. She'd been carrying this weight since she was 19, when the first diagnosis came. College dreams had dissolved into double shifts at Grind Coffee on Peachtree Street. Every dollar counted, every penny stretched. Her phone buzzed. Another overdue notice from Atlanta General. $47,000 in medical bills, growing like a cancer of its own. Baby girl? Her mother's voice was barely a whisper. Camilla turned, forcing a smile that felt like lifting stones. I'm here, Mama. You don't have to stay. I know you got work. Shh. Camilla pulled the worn hospital chair closer to the bed, taking her mother's hand. The skin felt paper-thin, but the grip was still strong, still fighting. I'm exactly where I need to be. But even as she said it, Camilla's mind raced. The morning shift at the coffee shop started in 6 hours. She'd have to catch the last MARTA train, grab maybe 3 hours of sleep on her tiny apartment couch, then start the cycle again. Coffee, customers, bills, hospital, repeat. When did loving someone become so expensive? 20 minutes later, Camilla stood at the bus stop on Ponce de Leon, hood pulled up against the persistent Atlanta drizzle. The city moved around her in streams of headlights and hurried footsteps, everyone rushing towards somewhere she couldn't afford to go. Her phone screen showed 15% battery, like everything else in her life, running on empty. The coffee shop key felt heavy in her pocket. Grind Coffee had been her second home for 6 years, the place where she'd learned to make perfect foam art and memorize orders before customers finished speaking. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. The early morning regulars, the downtown office workers, the Georgia Tech students pulling all-nighters, they were her people. She'd never thought about love, real love, the kind that lasted past morning coffee and late-night texts. How could she? Love required time she didn't have, emotional energy she couldn't spare, hope she couldn't afford. Every romance novel on the break-room shelf seemed like fiction written for someone else. Someone whose biggest worry was whether he'd call back, not whether the electricity would stay on. The bus arrived with a wheeze of hydraulics and diesel fumes. Camilla climbed aboard, fishing for exact change from her worn purse. The driver, a kind-faced woman named Geneva, who'd been running this route for 15 years, waved her off. You're good, honey. How's your mama? Fighting, Camilla managed, the word catching in her throat. As the bus pulled away from the curb, Camilla pressed her forehead against the cool window. Tomorrow would bring another day of vanilla lattes and forced smiles, another evening of insurance calls and medical bills. But tonight, in this moment between hospital and home, she allowed herself one dangerous thought. What if there was another way? She had no idea that 47 blocks away, in a glass tower that pierced the Atlanta skyline, a man was staring at his own reflection, asking himself the very same question. And tomorrow their worlds would collide in ways neither could imagine. He never made mistakes, until the app led him to the wrong place at exactly the right time. Darian Lockwood stood in the lobby of his 42nd floor office, adjusting platinum cufflinks that cost more than most people's monthly rent. At 34, he'd built Lockwood Grocers from a single Atlanta storefront into a multi-billion-dollar empire spanning 12 states. Numbers made sense to him. Contracts were clean. Emotions were inefficient. His phone buzzed with the morning's third call from his mother. Darian, darling, the Hendersons are hosting another dinner party next weekend. Their daughter Vivian just returned from Paris. He declined the call without listening to the rest. Marriage, heirs, legacy, the same conversation wrapped in different ribbons month after month. His board of directors had made it clear, at 34, unmarried with no succession plan, he was becoming a liability to his own company. The solution had come to him during a particularly tedious quarterly meeting. Why complicate things with romance? He needed a child, not a love affair. A business arrangement would be cleaner, more predictable. No messy emotions, no divorce lawyers, no broken hearts. He'd spent weeks researching surrogacy agencies, but every consultation felt wrong. Too clinical, too detached. He wanted something more personal, not love. He didn't believe in that fairy tale, but at least human connection. That's when his assistant suggested the app. Meet Local, designed for professional networking, but with a broader social component. Sometimes the best connections happen organically, Mr. Lockwood. Darian had rolled his eyes, but downloaded it anyway. His profile was minimal. Business professional seeking meaningful conversation. He'd planned to scroll through a few profiles, maybe find someone sophisticated enough to understand an unconventional arrangement. The app glitched. Instead of showing him the curated matches based on his preferences, MBA graduates, corporate professionals, country club members, it defaulted to location proximity. The first profile that appeared was blank, except for a name, Camilla B. Something made him click. 20 minutes later, he was standing outside Grind Coffee on Peachtree Street, feeling completely out of place in his $3,000 suit among college students and freelance writers. The autumn morning air carried the scent of Ethiopian beans and possibility. What am I doing here? He almost turned around. This was ridiculous. He had conferences to attend, acquisitions to finalize, a Fortune 500 company to run, but curiosity, a sensation he rarely indulged, kept his feet moving toward the door. The bell chimed as he entered. The coffee shop was everything his usual spots weren't. Mismatched furniture, local artwork on exposed brick walls, the comfortable chaos of people actually living their lives instead of performing them. Jazz played softly from speakers hidden somewhere in the ceiling, and then he saw her. Camilla stood behind the espresso machine, steam rising around her like morning mist. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup except for a hint of gloss that caught the light when she smiled at customers. She moved with practiced efficiency, calling out orders, wiping down counters, making conversation that seemed genuinely warm rather than professionally required. She was real, unguarded, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with designer clothes or professional styling. "What can I get started for you?" she asked when he reached the counter, her voice carrying a slight rasp that suggested too many early mornings and not enough sleep. Darian realized he'd been staring. Coffee. Black. Just black." She tilted her head, studying him with eyes that seemed to see too much. "You sure? We've got this Ethiopian single origin that's like drinking liquid silk. Might change your perspective on the whole black coffee thing." He found himself nodding. "Okay. Surprise me." As she worked, Darian watched her hands, graceful, confident, wearing no jewelry except for a simple silver ring on her right hand. No wedding band. When she handed him the cup, their fingers brushed for just a moment. "First time here?" she asked. "Yes, I was in the neighborhood." She smiled, and something in his chest shifted. "Well, welcome to the neighborhood. I'm Camilla." "Darian." She turned to help the next customer, and Darian found himself lingering, pretending to check emails on his phone while stealing glances at her interaction with regulars. She remembered orders, asked about family members, offered free pastries to the homeless man who counted change in the corner. She treats everyone like they matter. When was the last time someone had looked at him, really looked at him, without seeing dollar signs or networking opportunities? An hour later, he was still there, nursing his second cup of what was indeed liquid silk. Camilla glanced over during a lull, raising an eyebrow. "Either that coffee's really good, or you're avoiding something important." The truth slipped out before he could stop it. Both. And for the first time in years, Darian Lockwood found himself wanting to tell someone his story. But first he needed to know hers. Some conversations start with small talk. Others begin with the weight of desperation. 3 days passed before Darian returned to Grind Coffee. 3 days of staring at quarterly reports without seeing the numbers, of sitting through board meetings while replaying the sound of Camilla's laugh, of lying awake at 2 a.m. wondering what kind of man lingered in coffee shops like a lovesick teenager. "This is insane," he told himself as he pushed through the familiar door. "I'm a grown man with responsibilities, not some, well, look who's back." Camilla's voice cut through his internal lecture, warm with recognition. "Let me guess, liquid silk addiction?" She looked tired today. The smile was still there, but it didn't quite reach her eyes, and there were new lines of stress around her mouth. Her movements behind the counter were mechanical, efficient, but lacking the natural grace he'd noticed before. Something like that. Darian approached the counter, noting the way she avoided direct eye contact. Rough morning? Camilla's hands stilled on the espresso machine. For a moment her composure cracked, revealing something raw and vulnerable underneath. Then she caught herself, straightening her shoulders. Just life being life, you know. She forced brightness into her voice. Same Ethiopian blend? Actually, Darian leaned against the counter, lowering his voice. Could we talk? Somewhere private? Her eyes snapped to his, suddenly wary. I'm working. I know, but I have a business proposition, something that might interest you. Business proposition. The words tasted wrong in his mouth, too cold for what he was feeling, but he didn't know how else to begin. How do you tell someone you've been thinking about them for 3 days straight? How do you explain that their presence had somehow made his precisely ordered world feel incomplete? Camilla studied his face for a long moment. Behind them, the morning rush was winding down, leaving only a few laptop-wielding freelancers scattered across mismatched chairs. Jenna? She called to her co-worker, a pierced college student with purple hair. Can you cover for 15 minutes? She led him to a corner table near the window, where morning light caught the exhaustion in her features. Up close, Darian could see the slight tremor in her hands, the way she kept checking her phone like she was expecting bad news. So, Camilla said, settling into her chair with the careful movement of someone carrying invisible weight. What kind of business proposition are we talking about? Because if this is some kind of weird pickup line, it's not. Darian surprised himself with how quickly he responded. I mean, I'm attracted to you. I'd be lying if I said otherwise, but that's not why I'm here. Her eyebrows rose. Okay, now I'm really curious. Darian had rehearsed this conversation dozens of times in his head, but sitting across from her, seeing the wariness in her dark eyes, every prepared speech evaporated. He found himself telling the truth instead. I need a child. The words hung between them like a bridge he couldn't cross back over. Camilla blinked once, twice, her expression shifting from curiosity to confusion to something that might have been anger. Excuse me? I know how that sounds, Darian said quickly, but I'm not talking about some casual arrangement. I'm talking about something real, legal, beneficial for both of us. Camilla's phone buzzed against the table. She glanced at it and went pale. Atlanta General Billing Department. Even upside down, Darian could read the caller ID. I have to take this, she whispered, but her hands were shaking too badly to swipe the screen. Without thinking, Darian reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Let it go to voicemail. You don't understand. Medical bills. It wasn't a question. He'd seen that particular brand of desperation before, in his own mirror years ago, before the money and success had insulated him from such fears. Your mother. Camilla's facade finally crumbled. Tears she'd been holding back for weeks spilled over, and she buried her face in her hands. The treatment isn't working anymore. We owe $47,000, and they're talking about discontinuing care if we can't make payments. And I don't know what to do because I can't lose her. She's all I have. The words tumbled out in a broken rush, and Darian felt something shift inside his chest. This wasn't about attraction anymore, or even his carefully planned arrangement. This was about a woman drowning in circumstances beyond her control, fighting battles she couldn't win alone. What if you didn't have to worry about the money? He said softly. Camilla looked up, mascara smudged, eyes red but still defiant. What? The medical bills? All of them. What if I could make them disappear? In exchange for what? Because I'm not a baby. Darian met her gaze directly. I'll pay every medical bill. Ensure your mother gets the best treatment available. Set up a trust fund for ongoing care. In exchange, you give me a child. The coffee shop seemed to hold its breath around them. Camilla stared at him like he'd spoken in a language she didn't recognize. You're serious? Completely? You want to buy a baby from me? The disgust in her voice hit him like a physical blow. No, God, no, I want us to have a child together, legally, with dignity. Camilla stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You're insane. You don't even know me. I know enough. Darian rose too, reaching for her arm as she turned to leave. Camilla, wait! She spun back, eyes blazing. You know what? You're right. You want a baby? Fine. But not like this. Not like I'm some desperate woman you can pay off. Her voice carried across the coffee shop, drawing stares from other customers. But Camilla didn't care anymore. The professional mask had completely slipped, revealing the fierce, proud woman underneath. If you want this child, she said, her voice steady despite the tears, Then you marry me, real marriage, real commitment, because I won't be used, Mr. Lockwood, not even for $47,000. And with that ultimatum hanging between them, she walked away, leaving Darian to wonder if he'd just met his match, or his destruction. Sometimes the most important decisions are made in hospital corridors at 3 a.m. Camilla hadn't slept in 36 hours. The ICU waiting room at Atlanta General had become her second home. Uncomfortable plastic chairs and vending machine coffee, her only companions, as her mother fought through another crisis. The latest round of chemotherapy had triggered complications no one had anticipated. She pressed her palms against her burning eyes, trying to block out the fluorescent lights that never dimmed, the constant beeping of machines, the hushed conversations of doctors delivering news that families never wanted to hear. Her phone showed 17 missed calls from Grind Coffee. She'd called in sick for 3 straight days, something she'd never done before. Jenna was covering her shifts, bless her, but Camilla knew she was pushing her luck. Jobs like hers didn't come with unlimited compassion. Miss Brooks? Camilla looked up to find Dr. Morrison approaching, his expression carefully neutral in the way that usually preceded bad news. She braced herself. "Your mother is stable for now," he said, settling into the chair beside her. "But I need to be honest with you about what we're facing. Here it comes. The treatment options we discussed last week, they're experimental, expensive, and there's no guarantee they'll work." "Doctor." Morrison's voice was gentle but firm. "Without them, we're looking at palliative care, making her comfortable." "How much?" The words scraped her throat raw. "For the full treatment protocol? Around $200,000. Insurance will cover maybe 30%. The number hit her like a physical blow. $140,000. She made $22,000 a year serving coffee. Even if she worked every day for the rest of her life, she'd never earn enough. "There are payment plans." "Doctor," Camilla's voice was barely a whisper. "How long without treatment?" Dr. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. 6 weeks. Maybe 8. 6 weeks. After he left, Camilla sat in the artificial twilight of the waiting room, watching families navigate their own private hells. A teenage boy slept across 3 chairs, his mother's chemo bag hanging like a question mark above his dreams. An elderly man fed ice chips to his wife, murmuring promises about grandchildren they might never see grow up. "Love is expensive here," she thought, "and I'm broke." Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "I've been thinking about your counterproposal. Can we talk?" Darian Camilla stared at the screen until the words blurred. 3 days ago, she'd walked away from his offer with her pride intact, but her problems unsolved. 3 days of watching her mother grow weaker, of calculating impossible numbers, of realizing that dignity didn't pay medical bills. She texted back, "Room 847, ICU." 20 minutes later, Darian Lockwood stepped off the elevator, wearing dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt, the most casual she'd ever seen him. He looked around the sterile corridor, clearly out of his element, until he spotted her standing by the window. "How is she?" he asked, approaching cautiously. "Dying." The word came out flat, matter of fact. Camilla had no energy left for euphemisms. 6 weeks, maybe 8, unless we can afford treatment that costs more than I'll make in 6 years. Darian absorbed this information without flinching. What kind of treatment? She told him everything. The experimental drugs, the specialized procedures, the slim hope wrapped in an impossible price tag. He listened without interrupting, his grey eyes focused entirely on her face. "And if the treatment works? Maybe a year, maybe 5. Maybe she gets to meet your baby." The last words slipped out before Camilla could stop them. "Our baby," Darian corrected quietly. They stood in silence, watching Atlanta spread out below them through the hospital window. The city looked different from up here, less overwhelming, more manageable, like problems that seemed impossible might actually have solutions. "I brought something," Darian said eventually, pulling a manila envelope from his jacket. "A contract, not the kind you're thinking," he added quickly, seeing her expression. "A marriage contract. Real marriage, like you said, but with terms we both understand." Camilla took the envelope with hands that barely trembled. Inside were legal documents printed on expensive paper, but the language was surprisingly straightforward. Her medical expenses covered completely. Her mother's treatment fully funded. A wedding within 2 weeks. A home together. Respectful cohabitation until conception occurred, and then, tucked behind the legal pages, something handwritten in careful script. "Camilla, I know this isn't romantic. I know it's not the proposal you probably dreamed about as a little girl, but I want you to know that when I look at you, I don't see a transaction. I see someone brave enough to fight for the people she loves. Someone who makes coffee like art and treats strangers like family. Someone who deserves better than the hand life has dealt her. I can't promise you love. I don't know if I'm capable of it. But I can promise you respect, security, and the chance to save your mother. If that's enough, then yes, I'll marry you for real. Darian Camilla read the note twice, then folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope. Through the window, she could see the city coming alive with evening lights, millions of people living their own complicated love stories. There's one more thing, she said, not looking at him. I'm not experienced with men, with any of this. Darian was quiet for so long that she finally turned to face him. His expression was unreadable, but something in his eyes had softened. We'll figure it out, he said simply. Together. Down the hall, a nurse was calling her name. Her mother was awake, asking for her. Camilla looked at the contract in her hands, then at the man who had just offered to change her entire world. Okay, she whispered. Okay, I'll marry you, Darian Lockwood, for my mother, for your baby, for whatever this becomes. And as she walked back toward her mother's room, contract in hand, neither of them realized they had just agreed to something far more dangerous than a business arrangement. They had agreed to give each other hope. The wedding dress was borrowed, the vows were practical, but something in his eyes was completely real. 2 weeks later, Camilla stood in front of a full-length mirror in the courthouse bathroom, adjusting a cream-colored dress she'd rented from a shop in Little 5 Points. The fabric was simple, understated, but it fit her perfectly. The kind of dress a woman might choose for a small, intimate ceremony with someone she actually loved. This is insane, she thought, applying lipstick with hands that refused to stop shaking. I'm marrying a stranger for money. But even as she told herself it was just business, her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird. In 30 minutes, she would become Mrs. Darian Lockwood. In 30 minutes, her entire life would change. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jenna. You sure about this? Because if you need an escape route, I've got my car running outside. Camilla smiled despite her nerves. She'd told her co-worker the basics, a quick courthouse wedding helping with her mother's medical bills, but not the whole truth. How could she explain that she was entering a marriage that was simultaneously fake and the most real thing that had ever happened to her? A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Camilla, it's me. Darian's voice through the bathroom door sent another wave of butterflies through her stomach. She opened the door to find him in a charcoal grey suit that probably cost more than her car, but his tie was slightly crooked and there was a nervous energy in his movements that made him seem more human. You look... He stopped, his usual articulate composure deserting him completely. Beautiful. You look beautiful. The compliment hung between them, more intimate than it should have been for a business arrangement. Camilla felt heat rise in her cheeks. Your tie's crooked, she said, reaching up to adjust it without thinking. Her fingers brushed against his collar, and she felt him go still. This close, she could smell his cologne. Something expensive but understated, cedar, and something warmer. This close, she could see the flecks of gold in his grey eyes, the slight scar above his left eyebrow that made his perfect features more interesting. Camilla, he said quietly, his voice rougher than usual. Yeah? Are you sure about this? Because once we sign those papers, there's no going back. Your life is going to change in ways we can't predict. She studied his face, looking for signs of doubt or regret, but found only concern. Genuine concern for her, for what this decision would mean for her future. My mother started treatment yesterday, she said simply. The doctors say she's responding better than they hoped. So, yeah, I'm sure. Something shifted in his expression. Relief, maybe, or something deeper she couldn't name. Good, he said, because I brought you something. He pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket, and Camilla's breath caught. Inside was a simple platinum band set with a single diamond. Not enormous, not flashy, but undeniably real. Darian, I can't... It was my grandmother's, he said, taking the ring from the box with careful fingers. She was married to my grandfather for 57 years. He used to say she was the only person who ever made him want to be better than he was. Camilla's throat tightened. Why are you telling me this? Because even though this started as an arrangement, I want you to know that I respect what we're doing, what you're doing, and I want you to have something that means something. He held out his hand, palm up, waiting for her permission. After a moment, Camilla placed her left hand in his. The ring slid onto her finger perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. Mrs. Lockwood, the courthouse clerk called from down the hall. We're ready for you. The ceremony was brief, professional, utterly unromantic. Judge Patterson read from a script he'd clearly memorized years ago, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 other unions. When he asked if they took each other, Camilla's voice barely rose above a whisper, but Darian's "I do" was firm, unwavering. "You may kiss the bride." The moment stretched between them like a question neither was sure how to answer. Then Darian stepped closer, his hands coming up to frame her face with surprising gentleness. "Is this okay?" he murmured, so quietly only she could hear. Camilla nodded, not trusting her voice. The kiss was soft, careful, lasting only a few seconds. But in those seconds, something fundamental shifted. This wasn't about contracts or medical bills anymore. This was about two people who had just promised to build something together, even if neither of them knew what that something would become. When they broke apart, Darian's thumbs brushed across her cheekbones, wiping away tears she hadn't realized she was crying. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For making this feel real." Outside the courthouse, Atlanta hummed with afternoon traffic and ordinary life. People rushing to meetings, couples walking hand in hand, children chasing pigeons in the small park across the street. The world looked exactly the same as it had an hour ago, but everything had changed. "So," Darian said, offering her his arm as they walked toward the parking garage. "Mrs. Lockwood, ready to go home?" Home. The word carried weight she wasn't prepared for. "Your home," she corrected. "Our home," he said, and something in his voice made her believe it might actually be true. But neither of them was prepared for what would happen when the door closed behind them that night, and business became something far more complicated than either had bargained for. She had prepared for many things, but not for the way he looked at her like she was precious. Darian's penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a glass tower in Buckhead, with floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased Atlanta's skyline like a living painting. Camilla stood in the entryway, still wearing her wedding dress, feeling impossibly small in the vast space of marble floors and designer furniture. "This is—" she started, then stopped, not knowing how to finish. "Too much?" Darian asked, watching her reaction carefully. He'd loosened his tie, removed his jacket, but still carried himself with that controlled precision she was beginning to recognize as his default setting. "Different," she settled on. "Very different from my studio apartment." The truth was it was beautiful. Clean lines and warm woods, art that actually meant something instead of mass-produced prints. A kitchen that looked like it belonged in a magazine, but it felt like a museum. Perfect, untouchable, designed for looking rather than living. "I had your things moved over this afternoon," Darian said, gesturing toward the staircase. "Your room is upstairs. Private bathroom, walk-in closet. I thought you might want your own space. Until we make a baby." The unspoken words hung between them like smoke. Camilla nodded, grateful for his consideration, but also strangely disappointed. This was supposed to be a business arrangement, she reminded herself. Separate rooms made sense. "Are you hungry?" he asked. "I could order something." "Thai? Italian? There's a place that does incredible sushi." "Darian." She turned to face him fully, noting the way his hands moved restlessly at his sides. "You're nervous?" It wasn't a question. This confident CEO who commanded boardrooms and built empires was fidgeting like a teenager on a first date. "I am," he admitted, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "This is new territory for me. Marriage? All of it." He ran a hand through his hair, messing up the perfectly styled waves. "I've never lived with anyone, never had to consider someone else's needs, someone else's schedule. I'm probably going to be terrible at this." The vulnerability in his confession did something to Camilla's carefully constructed walls. This wasn't the polished businessman who'd propositioned her in a coffee shop. This was just a man, as uncertain about their future as she was. "Well," she said, surprising herself with a small laugh, "I've never been married to a millionaire, so I guess we're both improvising." "Billionaire, actually." "What?" "I'm worth about 2.3 billion, last time Forbes checked." He said it matter-of-factly like he was commenting on the weather. Does that change anything?" Camilla stared at him, processing this information. She'd known he was wealthy, but the actual number felt surreal. "Should it?" "Most people think it should." "I'm not most people," she said, and meant it. "Money doesn't change who you are underneath. Rich or poor, you're still just Darian." Something in his expression shifted, softened. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "Make it sound so simple." They ordered Chinese takeout, Darian's suggestion, though he confessed he usually just ate whatever his assistant ordered for working dinners. They sat on his pristine white couch with cartons spread across the coffee table, and for the first time since meeting him, Camilla saw him truly relax. "Tell me something," she said, twirling lo mein around her chopsticks. "What did you want to be when you were little, before the business empire?" Darian paused, a dumpling halfway to his mouth. "You'll laugh." "I won't." "A teacher, 3rd grade specifically." He set down his chopsticks, lost in the memory. "I used to line up my action figures and teach them math, had a little chalkboard and everything." Camilla's heart squeezed. She could picture it perfectly. A serious little boy with grey eyes, patiently explaining addition to plastic superheroes. "What changed?" "My father died when I was 12, heart attack. Left my mother with a failing business and mountains of debt." His voice went flat, distant. "I learned pretty quickly that money was the difference between security and losing everything, so I got good at making it." "And the teaching dream?" "Dreams don't pay medical bills," he said simply. The parallel to her own situation wasn't lost on either of them. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the city lights twinkling beyond the windows like fallen stars. "What about you?" Darian asked eventually. "What did little Camilla want to be?" "A veterinarian. I was going to save all the stray animals in Atlanta." She smiled at the memory. "Had it all planned out? Big clinic, low-cost spay and neuter programs, the works. College? 2 years at Georgia State before Mom got sick. Turns out pre-med classes don't leave much time for double shifts at coffee shops." She said it without bitterness, but Darian caught the note of loss underneath. Another dream deferred by necessity, another young person forced to grow up too fast. "Maybe," he started, then stopped. "Maybe what?" "After, when things settle, maybe you could go back, finish your degree." The offer was casual, but the hope it sparked in Camilla's chest was anything but. "You'd want that?" "I'd want whatever makes you happy." The words hung between them, more intimate than anything in their marriage contract. Camilla felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the wine they'd opened. "It's getting late," Darian said softly, glancing at his watch. It was nearly midnight. "Yeah." Camilla stood, suddenly aware of the weight of the day, the enormity of what they'd committed to. "I should probably—" "Camilla." His voice stopped her as she reached the stairs. When she turned, he was standing too, hands in his pockets, looking younger than his 34 years. "This doesn't have to happen tonight," he said quietly. "The physical part. I know this is all moving fast and you said you haven't. I don't want you to feel pressured." Camilla studied his face in the dim lamplight. She could see the effort it cost him to offer her an out, to put her comfort before the arrangement they'd made. "What if I don't want to wait?" she heard herself say. Darian went very still. "Camilla, I'm not saying this because I feel obligated," she said quickly. "I'm saying it because maybe I want to. Maybe I want to know what it feels like to be wanted by someone who sees me as more than just a means to an end." He crossed the room slowly, stopping just close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "You are more," he said, his voice rough with something she couldn't name. "So much more than I expected, more than I knew I needed." When he cupped her face in his hands, Camilla felt her heart stop and restart. This wasn't about contracts or babies or business arrangements. This was about two lonely people who had somehow found each other in the chaos of their complicated lives. "Are you sure?" he whispered against her forehead. "I'm sure." And as he led her upstairs, their hands intertwined, both of them knew they were crossing a line from which there would be no return. From arrangement to something real, dangerous, and beautifully uncertain. He had expected duty. What he found was devotion he never knew he was capable of. The master bedroom was softly lit by bedside lamps, casting warm shadows across cream-colored walls and midnight blue linens. Camilla stood near the window, still in her wedding dress, watching the city lights blur through sudden tears she couldn't explain. Darian closed the door behind them with careful quiet, as if any sudden movement might shatter the fragile courage that had brought them here. When he turned, he found her silhouette trembling against the glass. "Hey," he said softly, approaching like she was a wounded bird. "We don't have to." "I'm scared," she whispered, not turning around. "Not of you, not of this, but of what happens after. When this stops being pretend." Darian's breath caught. "What makes you think it's pretend?" She turned then, moonlight catching the tears on her cheeks. "Isn't it? We barely know each other. We married for practical reasons. We're about to be intimate because we made an agreement. How is any of this real?" He stepped closer, close enough to see the pulse jumping at her throat, the way her hands trembled as she smoothed the fabric of her dress. "Because of this," he said simply, reaching up to catch a tear with his thumb. "Because you're crying and I want to fix whatever's hurting you. Because I've thought about you every day since we met, and it has nothing to do with contracts or arrangements." Camilla's eyes widened. "Darian, because when you adjusted my tie today, my heart stopped. Because you make me want to be the man you deserve, not just the one who can pay your bills." His voice grew rougher, more honest. "Because this terrifies me too, and I've never been afraid of anything in my life." She searched his face in the dim light, looking for lies or manipulation, but found only raw honesty. This controlled, powerful man was as vulnerable as she was. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "Neither do I," he confessed. "Not like this. Not when it matters." He reached for the zipper at the back of her dress, then stopped, his fingers barely brushing the fabric. "May I?" She nodded, turning her back to him. His hands were steady despite the tension she could feel radiating from him. The zipper whispered down slowly. Reverent and cool air kissed her spine. But instead of letting the dress fall, he pressed his forehead against the back of her neck. "You're shaking," he murmured against her skin. "So are you." They stood like that for a moment, breathing each other in, letting the magnitude of what they were doing settle around them. This wasn't just physical intimacy they were crossing into. It was emotional territory neither had ever explored. When Camilla turned in his arms, the dress pooled at her feet like fallen starlight. She stood before him in simple white cotton, beautiful in her vulnerability, and Darian felt something in his chest crack wide open. "You're perfect," he breathed, his hands hovering near her waist like he was afraid to touch. "I'm not. I'm scared and inexperienced and perfect," he repeated, silencing her doubts with the gentlest kiss. "Perfect for me." What followed was a slow discovery, tender and patient, and nothing like either had imagined. Darian had known physical intimacy before, but this was different. This was two people learning each other's languages, mapping territories of trust and tenderness. When Camilla gasped against his shoulder, overwhelmed by sensations she'd never experienced, he stopped completely. "Are you okay?" "Don't stop," she whispered, her fingers tangling in his hair. "Please don't stop." He didn't. He moved with her like they were dancing to music only they could hear, patient and careful and reverent. When she finally called his name, it wasn't duty or obligation that responded. It was something deeper, more dangerous, something that felt suspiciously like love. Afterward, they lay in the dark, Camilla's head on his chest, both of them trying to process what had just happened. The physical intimacy had been beautiful, but it was the emotional intimacy that had undone them both. "Darian?" Camilla's voice was small against his skin. What happens now?" He tightened his arms around her, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Now we see what we've built, and if I get pregnant, then we figure out how to be parents, together. And if I don't," he was quiet for so long, she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then we keep trying, for as long as you want." Something in his voice made her lift her head to look at him. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that what just happened, this isn't about the arrangement anymore. This is about us." He cupped her face in his hands, thumb tracing her lower lip. "I don't know when it happened, but somewhere between that first day in the coffee shop and tonight, this became real for me." Camilla's heart hammered against her ribs. "Real how?" "Real like I don't want this to end when you get pregnant. Real like I want to wake up next to you for the next 50 years. Real like—" He took a shaky breath. "Real like I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they were ready to cross. But as Camilla looked into his eyes, those grey eyes that had started out calculating and had somehow become tender, she realized she was already halfway across. "Good," she whispered against his lips, "because I think I'm falling too." And as they fell asleep tangled together, both of them knew that their careful arrangement had just become the most beautiful complication either had ever known. 3 weeks later, 2 pink lines would change everything, but not in the way either expected. Camilla stared at the pregnancy test in her trembling hands, the fluorescent lighting of the grind coffee bathroom making everything feel surreal. 2 pink lines, clear as daylight, undeniable as gravity. Pregnant. She'd suspected for days. The exhaustion that went beyond her usual tiredness, the way coffee, her beloved life-sustaining coffee, suddenly made her stomach turn. The weird metallic taste that no amount of brushing could eliminate. But suspecting and knowing were two very different things. Her phone buzzed with a text from Darian. Left early today, cooking dinner, see you at home. The heart emoji was new. 3 weeks of marriage had brought small changes, gentle progressions that felt natural despite their unconventional beginning. He'd started leaving little notes in her lunch bag. She'd begun reading on his couch while he worked, their comfortable silence a language all its own. Last night he'd whispered "I love you" against her neck while they made love, and she'd said it back without hesitation. It had stopped feeling like pretend. Now, staring at the test results, everything felt complicated again. She wrapped the test in tissue and stuffed it into her purse, then splashed cold water on her face. In the mirror, she looked the same as she had that morning. Same dark eyes, same full lips, same face that Darian had started kissing awake each morning. But everything was different now. I'm carrying his child. The thought should have filled her with triumph. This was what they'd planned, what they'd agreed to. Mission accomplished. But instead, she felt a strange hollowness, a fear she couldn't name. The bus ride home took forever. Camilla pressed her forehead against the cool window, watching Atlanta blur past while her mind raced. How would she tell him? Over dinner? In bed? Should she make it special somehow or just blurt it out? What if this changes everything between us? The penthouse felt different when she walked in. Darian's suit jacket was draped over a chair, his tie loosened, sleeves rolled up as he moved around the kitchen with focused concentration. The scent of garlic and herbs filled the air. "Hey, beautiful," he called, without looking up from whatever he was stirring. "How was your day? Mrs. Patterson came in again asking for you specifically. I think you've got a fan." "Good," Camilla managed, setting down her purse with careful precision. "Smells amazing in here. Figured I'd try my hand at actual cooking instead of ordering out again. Found this recipe for chicken piccata that looked impossible enough to be interesting." He glanced up then, really looking at her for the first time. "You okay? You look pale." Camilla opened her mouth to tell him, then closed it again. He looked so relaxed, so content in their little domestic bubble. What if knowing about the baby changed that? What if it reminded him that this had all started as a transaction? "Just tired," she said instead. "Long day." Darian frowned, abandoning his cooking to walk over to her. He pressed the back of his hand against her forehead, then cupped her face in his palms. "You sure that's all? You've been off for a few days." He's noticed. Of course he had. In 3 weeks, he'd learned to read her moods like weather patterns. "I'm fine," she insisted, but her voice came out too bright, too forced. Darian studied her face with those perceptive grey eyes that seemed to see straight through her defenses. "Camilla, what's wrong? Did something happen at work? Is it your mom?" "My mom's doing great, actually. The doctors are amazed at how well she's responding to treatment." And that was true. The experimental therapy was working better than anyone had dared to hope. Her mother had color in her cheeks again, was making plans for the future. "Then what?" "I need to tell you something," Camilla blurted out, then immediately wished she could take it back. Darian went very still. "Okay." They stood in the kitchen, the dinner he'd been preparing forgotten on the stove, while Camilla tried to find words for the thing that was going to change everything. "The night we got married," she started, then stopped. "I mean, after. What happened between us? It was supposed to be about making a baby, but it wasn't," Darian said quietly. "Not for me. Not for me either." She took a shaky breath. "But that doesn't change the fact that we succeeded." The words hung between them like a bomb with a lit fuse. Darian's face went through a series of expressions, confusion, realization, and then something that looked almost like panic. "You're pregnant." "Yes." He stepped back, running a hand through his hair. The gesture was so familiar now, but tonight it felt like he was pulling away from her. "How long have you known?" "I took the test 20 minutes ago." "And you're sure?" "2 tests, both positive." Darian leaned against the kitchen island, his knuckles white where they gripped the marble edge. The silence stretched between them, filled with the sound of simmering sauce and unspoken fears. "This is what we wanted," he said finally, but his voice sounded hollow. "Is it?" Camilla's question came out sharper than she'd intended. "Because you look like I just told you someone died." "No, this is good news, great news." But he still wasn't looking at her, and something cold was settling in Camilla's chest. "Darian, look at me." When he finally met her eyes, she saw it. The fear she'd been trying to ignore in herself reflected back at her. Fear that this pregnancy would remind them both what this relationship had really been about. Fear that love born from necessity might not survive the reality of parenthood. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now we have a baby. We figure it out. Together? Of course together. This is what we planned." What we planned. Not what we wanted. Not what we dreamed of. What we planned, like a business meeting or a quarterly report. Camilla felt something crack inside her chest. Right. The plan. Camilla, that's not what I meant. Isn't it? She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the kitchen. Because for a minute there, I forgot this was all an arrangement. I forgot you married me to get an heir, not a wife. That's not fair. You know that's not how I feel about you now, do I? Because the second I tell you I'm pregnant, you shut down. You can barely look at me. Darian's jaw tightened. I'm processing. This is big news. This is what you wanted. The words came out louder than she'd intended, edged with hurt and frustration. A baby. A heir. Mission accomplished, right? Don't, he said, his voice going dangerously quiet. Don't reduce what we have to that. Then what do we have, Darian? Because right now I'm not sure. They stared at each other across the kitchen that had felt like home 20 minutes ago and now felt like a battlefield. The timer on the stove went off, a sharp intrusion that made them both jump. Dinner's ready, Darian said automatically, but neither of them moved. I'm not hungry, Camilla whispered, and as she walked upstairs to the guest room she hadn't used since their wedding night, both of them realized that creating a life together was only the beginning of their real challenges. Sometimes, the most honest conversations happen when you're ready to walk away. Camilla woke up at 3 a.m. with her face pressed against her phone screen, having fallen asleep scrolling through apartment listings in Midtown. The guest room felt suffocating, decorated in shades of beige that had probably cost more than her yearly salary, but held no warmth, no personality. Through the walls she could hear Darian moving around downstairs, the soft clink of dishes, the whisper of the refrigerator opening and closing. He was stress cleaning again, something she'd learned he did when his carefully ordered world felt chaotic. She'd been doing it too. For the past 4 hours, she'd organized her small collection of belongings, written and rewritten a text she couldn't bring herself to send, and Googled early pregnancy symptoms until her eyes burned. 6 weeks. That's how far along she probably was. 6 weeks of tiny cells dividing and growing, creating something that was part her, part him, part this complicated love they'd built from nothing. Her phone buzzed. A text from Darian, sent from somewhere in the same house where they were both wide awake, both avoiding each other. Can't sleep either. She stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "No, come downstairs. I don't think that's a good idea. Please, we need to talk." Camilla closed her eyes, pressing the phone to her chest. They did need to talk. About the baby, about what happened next, about whether she was going to pack her few belongings and disappear back into the life she'd had before Darian Lockwood changed everything. She found him in the living room, sitting on the floor with his back against the couch, wearing rumpled pajama pants and a t-shirt she'd never seen him in. His hair was disheveled, and there were shadows under his eyes that spoke of his own sleepless night. "Hi," he said quietly when she appeared in the doorway. "Hi." She stayed where she was, arms wrapped around herself, suddenly aware that she was wearing one of his old Georgia Tech shirts she'd claimed weeks ago. "I made tea, chamomile. I read somewhere it's safe for—" He gestured vaguely in her direction. "For pregnant women," she finished. "Yeah." The word hung between them, heavy with everything they hadn't said the night before. Camilla walked over and sat on the opposite end of the couch, accepting the mug he offered but not drinking from it. "I've been thinking," Darian said, staring into his own tea like it might contain answers, "about what you said, about this being an arrangement." Camilla's stomach clenched. "And? You were right." The words hit her like a physical blow. She'd been hoping he'd fight her on it, prove her wrong, show her that what they had was real despite how it started. "It did start as an arrangement," he continued, still not looking at her. "A business transaction. I needed an heir. You needed money for your mother's treatment. Clean, simple, efficient. Darian, let me finish." He finally looked at her, and she saw something raw and desperate in his expression. "It started as an arrangement, but that's not what it is now. At least not for me." Camilla set down her mug with trembling hands. "What is it now?" "Terrifying." The word came out like a confession. "It's terrifying because I've never wanted anything the way I want this. Want you. Want the life we've been building. Then why did you pull away last night? Why did you look at me like I was afraid?" He let out a hollow laugh. "Because I was. I am. Scared out of my mind." "Of what?" Darian stood abruptly, beginning to pace the length of the room. "Of screwing this up. Of being a terrible father like mine was. Of you realizing that you settled for me because you were desperate, not because you actually loved me. The honesty in his voice stopped Camilla's breath. "Darian, that's not, isn't it?" He turned to face her, his control finally cracking completely. "You married me to save your mother. Everything good that's happened between us came after you'd already committed to this arrangement. How do I know what's real and what's just you making the best of a bad situation?" Camilla stood too, anger flaring in her chest. "How can you even ask me that, after everything we've shared, everything we've been to each other? Because I love you too much to pretend." The words exploded out of him, raw and desperate. "I love you so much it's rewriting everything I thought I knew about myself, and the idea that this baby might be the only reason you stay. It's killing me." They stared at each other across the room, both breathing hard, the truth finally naked between them. "You think I'm with you because of the money," Camilla said quietly. "I think you're with me because you're a good person who honors her commitments, even when they cost you your freedom. And you think having this baby will trap me here. I think having this baby will give you everything you agreed to. Your mother's treatment is paid for. You'll have financial security for life. The contract will be fulfilled." Camilla felt tears burning behind her eyes. "So you think I'll leave? I think you should have the choice to leave, without feeling guilty or obligated or trapped by some arrangement we made when you were desperate." The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, Atlanta was beginning to wake up, the distant hum of early traffic, the first hints of dawn creeping through the windows. "Can I tell you something?" Camilla said finally. Darian nodded, not trusting his voice. "I was going to leave last night. I spent hours looking at apartments, planning how to tell you I was going back to my old life." His face went pale. "Camilla, but then I realized something." She stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his grey eyes. "I wasn't researching apartments because I wanted to leave you. I was researching them because I was terrified you'd want me to leave once you had what you really wanted. That's not the baby, Darian. I was afraid that once I gave you a child I'd become unnecessary, that you'd realize you could have any woman, someone more sophisticated, more educated, more worthy of being Mrs. Lockwood." They looked at each other, both seeing their own fears reflected back. "We're both idiots," Darian said softly. "Complete idiots," Camilla agreed. He reached for her then, pulling her into his arms with the desperation of a man who'd thought he was losing everything. She melted into him, breathing in the scent that had become home. "I don't want you to stay because of the baby," he murmured against her hair. "I want you to stay because you choose me, every day, even when I'm scared and stupid and pulling away instead of holding on." "Then ask me," she whispered against his chest. "What?" She pulled back to look at him. "Ask me to stay, not because of our arrangement, not because of the baby. Ask me to stay because you love me." Darian cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away tears she didn't realize were falling. "Camilla Brooks Lockwood," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Will you stay with me? Not because of any contract or obligation, but because you want to build a life with the man who loves you more than his next breath?" "Yes," she whispered, and then louder. "Yes, I choose you, Darian. I choose us." And as the sun rose over Atlanta, painting their tangled together silhouettes in gold, both of them finally understood that the most beautiful love stories begin not with perfection, but with the courage to be honest about fear. Some moments change everything, and this one would heal hearts neither knew were still broken. 2 months later, Camilla sat in the passenger seat of Darian's car, a small wrapped package in her lap and her heart hammering against her ribs. The October morning was crisp, painting Atlanta's trees in shades of gold and amber that made everything look like a painting. "You sure about this?" Darian asked for the third time, his fingers drumming against the steering wheel as they sat in the hospital parking lot. "I'm sure." Camilla touched her still flat stomach, where their baby was growing strong and healthy according to Dr. Martinez. "She needs to know, and I need her to know before it becomes obvious." The unspoken words hung between them. At 12 weeks, Camilla was finally ready to share their news, but her mother had to be first. They'd grown closer in these past weeks, she and Darian. The fight had cleared the air between them, stripped away the pretenses and fears that had been building walls neither realized they were constructing. Now they talked about everything: his childhood dreams of teaching, her plans to maybe return to school, the nursery they'd started sketching out on napkins during lazy Sunday mornings. "What if she cries?" Camilla asked, clutching the little blue box tighter. "Then we'll cry with her," Darian said simply, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "Happy tears, scared tears, whatever kind she needs." The oncology ward smelled the same as always, antiseptic and hope, and the particular exhaustion that came with fighting for every day. But when they reached room 347, Camilla stopped short. Her mother was sitting up in bed, actually sitting up, wearing a soft pink scarf around her head and lipstick that made her brown skin glow. She was laughing at something on the small TV mounted to the wall, and the sound was pure music. "Look at you," her mother said when she saw them, her smile wide and genuine, "all dressed up like you're going somewhere fancy." Camilla looked down at herself. She'd changed clothes 3 times that morning, finally settling on a simple yellow dress that Darian said made her look like sunshine. He wore dark jeans and a blue button-down, casual but somehow significant. "We came to see you, Mama. That's fancy enough for me." Her mother's eyes shifted between them, taking in their joined hands, the nervous energy that practically radiated from both of them. "All right, babies," she said, muting the TV. "What's got you two looking like you swallowed secrets?" Camilla and Darian exchanged a look. They'd practiced this moment, but now that it was here, all their rehearsed words evaporated. "I have something for you," Camilla managed, holding out the small box with trembling fingers. Her mother took it with curious eyes, turning it over in her hands. The wrapping paper was soft blue with tiny silver stars. Camilla had spent 20 minutes in the gift wrap aisle, wanting it to be perfect. "What's this for?" "It's not my birthday." "Just open it, Mama." Inside the box, nestled in white tissue paper, was a pair of tiny blue booties no bigger than her thumb, hand-knitted, impossibly small, with little teddy bear buttons on the sides. Her mother lifted them out with careful fingers, her expression shifting from confusion to wonder, to something that might have been disbelief. "Camilla!" Her voice was barely a whisper. "You're going to be a grandmother," Camilla said, tears already spilling down her cheeks. The silence that followed seemed to last forever. Her mother stared at the booties, then at Camilla, then at Darian, her face cycling through emotions too complex to name. "How far along?" she asked finally. 12 weeks. The baby's due in May. And you're happy about this?" Camilla looked at Darian, seeing her own joy reflected in his eyes. "So happy, Mama." Scared and nervous and excited and happy. Her mother's face crumpled then, but instead of the worried tears Camilla had expected, these were pure joy. She pressed the booties to her chest and sobbed, deep, healing sobs that seemed to release months of fear and pain. "Oh, baby girl," she whispered, reaching for Camilla with shaking arms. "Oh, my sweet baby girl." Camilla fell into her mother's embrace, both of them crying and laughing at the same time. Over her mother's shoulder, she saw Darian wiping his own eyes, his usual composure completely abandoned. "A grandmother," her mother repeated, pulling back to look at Camilla's face. "I'm going to be a grandmother. The doctors say the treatment is working better than they hoped," Camilla said, suddenly urgent. "They think you'll see graduation, maybe even wedding, maybe everything," her mother finished, understanding flooding her features. "Maybe I'll get to spoil this baby rotten." "That's the plan," Darian said, his voice rough with emotion. He approached the bed slowly like he was afraid of intruding on their moment. "If that's okay with you, Mrs. Brooks." Camilla's mother studied him for a long moment. This man who had married her daughter under strange circumstances, who had paid for treatments that were giving her more time, who was looking at Camilla like she hung the moon. "You love her," she said. It wasn't a question. "More than I knew was possible," Darian answered honestly. "And this baby? This baby is already the most wanted child in the world." Something in her mother's expression softened completely. "Then come here, son." Darian's eyes widened in surprise, but he moved closer to the bed. Camilla's mother reached out and took his hand, pressing the tiny booties into his palm. "These babies need a lot of love," she said, her voice stern but kind. "You think you're ready for that kind of responsibility?" Darian looked down at the booties, so small they seemed impossible, then back at her. "I think your daughter is teaching me how to be ready." "Good answer." She patted his cheek with maternal affection. "Now, when do I get to plan a baby shower? Because I have some very specific ideas about themes and cake flavors." As her mother launched into detailed plans involving teddy bear decorations and enough food to feed half of Atlanta, Camilla felt something settle in her chest that had been restless for months. This was what family looked like. Not perfect, not conventional, but real and messy and full of love that multiplied instead of dividing. "What are you thinking about?" Darian asked quietly, moving to stand behind her chair, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. "I'm thinking about how this all started," she said, leaning back against him. "With a mistake, an app glitch that sent you to the wrong coffee shop. Best mistake I ever made. Mine too." Her mother looked up from the baby planning notebook she'd somehow produced from her bedside table. "What mistake?" Camilla and Darian shared a smile, the kind that held entire conversations. The mistake that brought us together, Mama. The beautiful, perfect mistake that gave us everything we didn't know we needed. And as the afternoon sun streamed through the hospital window, painting them all in golden light, 3 generations sat together, planning for a future that had seemed impossible just months before. Proof that sometimes the most unexpected love stories write themselves. 5 years later, she still came to the same coffee shop, but now she brought laughter and tiny hands that reached for everything. The bell above the door of Grind Coffee chimed the same familiar melody it had for 7 years, but today it announced the arrival of something extraordinary. Camilla Lockwood stepped through the doorway, carrying a sleepy-eyed little boy with dark curls and his father's thoughtful grey eyes, while a toddler with pigtails and her mother's infectious smile tugged at her free hand. "Mama, coffee!" 3-year-old Naomi announced loudly enough for the entire shop to hear. "Make the pretty foam!" Jenna looked up from behind the espresso machine, older now, purple hair faded to lavender, but her grin just as mischievous. "Well, look what the universe dragged in, if it isn't our favorite coffee royalty." "Don't start," Camilla laughed, settling 4-year-old Marcus on her hip, while Naomi immediately began exploring the familiar territory of mismatched chairs and exposed brick walls. "We're just here for the usual Saturday morning chaos. Where's the big man today?" Jenna asked, already starting Marcus's order. Hot chocolate with extra marshmallows and a dollop of whipped cream that would inevitably end up on his nose. "Conference call with Tokyo, but he'll be here by lunch." Camilla's wedding ring caught the morning light as she smoothed Marcus's unruly hair. Some things never change, but so many things had. The experimental treatment that had saved her mother's life had worked beyond anyone's wildest hopes. 3 years of remission and counting, with energy enough to spoil her grandchildren and volunteer at the community center, teaching elderly women how to knit baby blankets for the local hospital. Camilla had gone back to school, part-time at first, while pregnant with Marcus, then full-time after Naomi arrived. Dr. Camilla Lockwood, DVM, had a nice ring to it. Her practice was small but growing, focused on providing affordable veterinary care in underserved communities. Darian had insisted on funding the startup costs, but the success was entirely hers. "Mama, tell the story," Naomi demanded, climbing onto Camilla's lap in their favorite corner booth, the same table where her parents had once sat, discussing arrangements that became so much more. "Which story, baby?" "The coffee story, how you and Daddy met." Marcus perked up, chocolate mustache and all. "With the broken phone." "Broken app," Camilla corrected gently, but her heart squeezed with familiar warmth. Her children loved this story. The romantic version, anyway. The coffee shop meet cute, the whirlwind courtship, the fairy tale wedding they'd never actually had, but somehow created in the retelling. They didn't need to know about medical bills or desperate proposals. Not yet. Someday, when they were older, she'd tell them the whole truth, how love could grow from the most unlikely soil, how the most beautiful families sometimes began with the messiest circumstances. For now, it was enough that they knew their parents chose each other every single day. "Once upon a time," Camilla began, and both children settled in with the satisfied sighs of those hearing a beloved bedtime story in broad daylight. "There was a very silly app that didn't know what it was doing." Halfway through the story, Darian appeared in the doorway, still wearing his perfectly tailored suit, but with his tie already loosened and sleeves rolled up. He scanned the coffee shop until he found them, and his entire face transformed, the careful control melting into something warm and unguarded. "Daddy," Naomi launched herself from Camilla's lap with the fearless abandon of a child who had never doubted she would be caught. Darian scooped her up, spinning her around until she giggled with delight, then moved to kiss Camilla's forehead and ruffle Marcus's hair. "How did the call go?" Camilla asked, shifting to make room for him in the booth. "Closed the deal. The new distribution center in Portland is a go." He slid in beside her, and she felt the familiar settling sensation of completeness when his thigh pressed against hers. "But more importantly, did I miss the part where Mama spills coffee all over Daddy?" "That didn't happen," Marcus protested indignantly. "It did too," Darian insisted, his eyes twinkling. "Your Mama was so nervous about meeting me that she forgot how to hold a cup." "I was not nervous," Camilla laughed, even though they both knew she had been. "I was being professional, professionally beautiful," he murmured against her ear, and after 5 years of marriage, she still blushed. They stayed for 2 hours, watching their children charm the regular customers and paint themselves with chocolate and whipped cream. Mrs. Patterson, now 87 and still sharp as a tack, taught Naomi how to make napkin flowers. A Georgia Tech student helped Marcus build elaborate structures out of sugar packets. It was beautifully ordinary, perfectly imperfect, everything neither Camilla nor Darian had known they were looking for. As they prepared to leave, Camilla paused at the counter where it all began. The espresso machine still hissed and gurgled with the same sounds that had provided the soundtrack to their first conversation. The menu board still advertised Ethiopian single origin and the promise of liquid silk. "Regrets?" Darian asked quietly, following her gaze. Camilla looked at their children, Naomi helping Marcus put on his tiny jacket, both of them chattering about the playground they'd visit next. She thought about her mother, who was probably at this very moment teaching a knitting class and telling anyone who would listen about her brilliant grandchildren. She thought about the veterinary practice that gave her purpose, the home they'd built together, the love that had grown from the strangest soil imaginable. "Just one," she said finally. Darian's face fell slightly. "What's that?" "I regret that it took us so long to figure out that the best love stories don't start with once upon a time. They start with, what if we tried something crazy?" Relief and laughter lines crinkled around his eyes. "Dr. Lockwood, are you suggesting we were crazy?" "Completely insane," she confirmed, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him properly while their children made exaggerated gagging noises behind them. "Best decision we ever made." Outside, Atlanta sparkled with spring sunshine and infinite possibility. The city that had witnessed their desperate beginning now saw their joyful continuation, a family built from hope, sustained by choice, and bound together by the radical idea that love could bloom anywhere, even in the most unlikely places. As they walked toward the park, Naomi's small hand in Darian's and Marcus perched on Camilla's shoulders. None of them noticed the young couple at the corner table, heads bent together over a tablet, nervously discussing an arrangement that might just change both their lives. Love, after all, was always beginning somewhere. What would you have done in Camilla's situation? Would you have had the courage to demand real love instead of just accepting the arrangement? Your participation in our channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.